Good morning. Today is February 8th, 2021. And that's important to know because today I'm going to talk about a few things that I've seen in videos recently, as well as many other things. The focus of my video is why we are not subject to the Constitution or the rules and regulations of Congress, and why we are not citizens of the United States. Okay, so the first thing I believe that we need to understand is that America is much different from many other countries, including the United Kingdom. And what I found in talking to people and listening to people and reading some of the things that they write is that generally people want to put themselves in a position under government. They want to be followers instead of leaders, and they want to be dependents instead of independent. And being that way, they want to put themselves under government, such as what they have in the United Kingdom. Being under government means that someone is sovereign over you. So if you look at places like the United Kingdom, sovereignty comes from the top down. It starts at the Pope, and he gives some to the king. And the people live on the king's lands, and the Pope ordains the king so that he can have sovereignty over all the people. Now, one of the reasons why Catholicism was so popular or forced among the people in the United Kingdom, which was one reason why people left there and came to America and fought a Revolutionary War, is because according to the Catholic structure, the sovereignty comes from the Pope and comes to the king, and then the people really have basically none. When the founders came to, or the colonists came to America, they wanted to, first of all, have freedom of religion. Freedom of religion gave them the right to claim their individual sovereignty, okay? And if the glare is on the whiteboard, this just says America right here. And then this says, it's a bottom-up sovereignty. It starts from the people and moves upward. So being that we are each sovereign, we create our governments. And governments, it said, are instituted by men, which we also say the consent of the governed. So we give our consent to be governed by giving some of our sovereignty to the state, and the state giving some to create a United States for defense with the sea purposes. Okay, now on this side, when you have sovereignty coming from the top down, it says that governments are instituted for men from the top down, and that the kings are supposed to do what's right for the people. But often, because there's no check and balance, and they maintain the sovereignty over the people, or that's the power and authority over the people, they basically can do what they want without repercussion, which is, this idea paved the way for the Magna Carta, or the Great Charter. In America, we have no forced religion. And the Declaration of Independence states that, because it says you're endowed by your Creator with certain unalienable rights, or inalienable rights. Okay, so when we had a Declaration of Independence and then Articles of Confederation, then they created a Constitution for defense purposes with a C, which means fortification, not S, which means vengeance. It allowed for a representative government. Okay, now we're getting into the citizenship question. So in the Constitution, you see that there are two positions that require a person to be a citizen of the United States. Those positions are senators, representatives, and the president. And you can look that up in the Constitution. Now, I want to make note here that even the members of the judicial branch, the justices, are not required. There's no requirement for them to be citizen of the United States. There's only a requirement for them to be in good behavior, which was the same requirement to become a citizen of the United States for the members of Congress. That before they became citizens of the United States, and this is in the early laws on naturalization, they had to have 2 years of good behavior working on federal lands as clerks or whatever positions they had available at the time. So the clerks would go and they would get a job as a civil servant on the federal lands, and they would work for 2 years. And after 2 years, they could apply for citizenship. And then after that, started the clock for them to become members of Congress or eventually the president, because the president was required to have 14 years. And senators and representatives were to have, I think, 6 to 9 years citizenship. Okay, to become a citizen, it required a naturalization process, which in the early days was done through the common law courts, which were the state courts. Okay, and I want to read you something here that talks about citizenship. In 1848, Wharton wrote in the Law Lexicon, citizen as defined by Aristotle in the beginning of the third book of the Politics, defines a citizen to be one who is a partner in the legislative and judicial power. Okay, so our Constitution doesn't require the justice to be a citizen. It requires only the legislators to be citizens and the president. So it's defined already in the Constitution that a citizen of the United States has to, or that a legislator or the president has to be a citizen of the United States. And a citizen, according to Aristotle, is a partner. So it's a member of Congress or a member of the executive, being the president, and that in order to be a member, you have to become subject to a thing. And our members, legislators and president, are subject to the Constitution. And they're subject to the Constitution because they're required to take an oath. So if you're not a citizen of the United States and you're not a legislator or and the president, then what are you? Well, you're a private citizen. Private citizen. Okay, so I would like to read you a couple things. I have a book called Washington and the American Republic by Benson J. Lossing in volume 3. There's a copy of the front of the book. On page 35, Washington is writing to a friend of his. He says, he arrived at Annapolis on Friday, the 19th of December, where he was joined by Mrs. Washington and many warm personal friends. On the following day, he addressed a note to the Congress, inquiring when and in what manner it would be proper to offer his resignation, because he had a commission at this time. And on Monday, he was present at a dinner ordered by that body. In the evening, he attended a grand ball given in his honor. On Tuesday, the 23rd, Washington wrote to the Baron Steuben, quote, Quote, "This is the last letter I shall write while I continue in the service of my country." So he was a public servant. He was a citizen of the United States. He was a public servant. "The hour of my resignation is fixed at 12 today, after which I shall become a private citizen on the banks of the Potomac." And later on it says he's going to enjoy the quiet life as a private citizen, okay? And let's look at something President Trump said. This was from Populist Press. Okay, Populist Press. And I didn't copy the title of this article, but down here's what I want you to look at. And it says, in the statement, Trump's lawyers said, "Your letter only confirms what is known to everyone. You cannot prove your allegations against the 45th president of the United States, who is now," because this was after he left office, and they're trying to impeach him, which makes absolutely no sense because he is now a private citizen. Okay, so he became a private citizen. He returned to his state of residence, which was Florida, which I don't know that he returned there, but that's where he went to retire as a private citizen. He left public service and he's retired as a public citizen, just like Washington did. Now, I'd also like to note that Washington resigned his commission, but then later he was elected president. So he left private life and went back into public service as the president. Okay. And now's a good time to talk about the military, okay, the militia. So our members of the military are required to be citizens of the United States. That's a policy thing, not a constitutional thing, because that's not in the Constitution. However, the militia, which originally were the people of the state. Okay, now I'm not talking about state citizens. I'm talking about just the general people of the state, the people inhabiting the state. The people inhabiting the state were private citizens, and they formed the militia. The states would form the militia. They would call into service the private citizens of the state to fight in defense with the sea in case of invasion. Okay, so if you look back in like ancestry.com or org, whatever it is, you can find a lot of commissions for private citizens. Well, I don't know if they were called commissions, but they were enlistment papers showing that the militia members were private citizens and they were called privates. Okay, they were called privates because they weren't citizens of the United States. They weren't, even though they were called into service, they really didn't receive money for their service because they were defending their states. Now, sometimes they received some lands. Okay, so Black's Law 6 also defines citizen, one who, under the Constitution and laws of the United States or of a particular state, is a member of the political community, owing allegiance, that's an oath, and being entitled to the enjoyment of full civil rights. So not only do you have your federal rights, you also have your full civil rights. All persons born or naturalized in the United States. Now, the United States, according to its own writings, including the Constitution and a report put out by the federal government in 1956, Part 1, and 1957, Part 2, states that the United States are the federal lands. Okay. And that looks like this. You can find this on HathiTrust, and you can also find it on archive.org. Okay, this is part 2, but there's also a part 1. This part 2 was completed in 1957. Part 1 in 1956, a year earlier. It was started, the committee was put together in 1953. Now look at what it says. Jurisdiction over federal areas within the states. Over federal areas. Jurisdiction means power and authority. Over federal areas within the state. Okay. This is a government report. Printed by the government printing office. All right. Now I have another one here. Inventory report on jurisdictional status of federal areas within the states. As of 1962, by GSA, the General Services Administration. You can find these reports. You can find these reports online also at HathiTrust. Now, what's important about these reports is that it has a list of the jurisdictions. And a lot of these reports were directions on how the people who worked for GSA would write up the contracts. Now, the contracts were intended to be between the government and private persons, private corporations, to supply services to the military posts or to the seat of government. And in order to know who did what and where, they have these jurisdictions. Now, some of these are mentioned in the Constitution, and some of these are just by policy. Okay, so the Congress makes laws for the United States. The United States are the federal lands. So I'm going to talk to you about the federal lands real quick. I know this maybe I'm going back and forth and it's kind of confusing, but stick with me and we're going to get through this. Okay, so in the first jurisdiction document I held up, okay, was this one. Chapter 1 of Part 1, Chapter 1, it says that the commission was put together for a certain purpose. And that the purpose was that some people, federal employees, so officers and employees who were living on federal lands at a Veterans Administration hospital wanted to send their dependent children to a school located off federal lands. Well, the state said, no, you can't do that. And the reason why the state said no is because the people on the federal lands didn't pay state taxes. They still don't pay state taxes unless they come off the federal lands and make purchases for themselves, for their own private use. So because they didn't pay state taxes, they weren't allowed to use state services. So the federal government sued in a local court. And the local court said no. Well, no, because you don't pay taxes to us, and so you can't for free use services that the private people in the state pay for. So then they took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court also said no. Because the same reasons, the federal citizens, the citizens of the United States, who are the federal citizens on the federal lands, did not pay taxes. So in order to get around that, so that the federal people could come off the federal lands and use state services, they created these licenses. They created birth certificates. They created all these ways in which, when they come off the federal lands onto the state lands, that they could have certain documents to show that they were entitled to use the service, and that the school or the hospital or the fire department or whatever service they were using, insane asylums even, they could charge back to the federal government. So that was the payment for the use of the services, which would then be given back to the state. And we know that they do that. They give those monies back to the states. Okay, so in order to do that, they had to make contracts with each of the states. So each of the states contracts with the federal government to supply these services to the people on the federal lands. They all look a little different. Some of them might look exactly the same, but some of them look different. They all had the right to contract with the federal government to receive money for supplying those services to the employees and officers on the federal lands. Because originally they stayed on the federal lands. They lived there, they worked there. If you go up to Leavenworth, Kansas, they have a large veterans facility there. And walking around, you can see all the old, at least back in 2006, you could see all the old homes that they would live in. They were starting to refurbish them about 2007, but I had left the area after that. And that was because all the employees lived there, because they were citizens of the United States and they were restricted to the federal lands. But then when they sued and then they made these contracts, the contracts were called state of. They were capitalized in such a way so that it was distinguished from just the general use saying like state of Texas generally, and proper state of Texas contractual. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why state of Texas, written in a certain way, cannot secede from the union, because state of Texas is a contract for providing services to the federal government. So if they're saying the state of Texas is going to secede from the union, they better have written state of in lowercase letters. Otherwise, they're trying to secede, and it's not going to work, because state of Texas cannot secede when you're talking about the dependent state created for contractual purposes between the federal government and the state to supply the services to the employees. Okay, so in reading this, we find that we get to exclusive legislative jurisdiction over such area had been ceded to the state, or ceded by the state to the federal government. Okay, and that's when we get to the exclusive legislative jurisdiction that is shown to us in the GSA books. Okay, now exclusive legislative jurisdiction, what that means is that when the state annexed some lands to the federal government, it did so also having annexed all legislative right, the power to make laws on those lands, which meant that the federal government then received exclusive legislative jurisdiction, which is also in the Constitution. So when it's talking about, the Constitution is talking about in Article 1, Section 8, I believe it's like the last or second to last a few sentences, clauses. It says that the federal Congress has exclusive jurisdiction. It doesn't have to say exclusive legislative jurisdiction. It just says exclusive, I believe it says exclusive, maybe it says exclusive legislative power. In the end, it's all the same. It's the exclusive legislative jurisdiction to make the laws on those federal lands. Okay, jurisdiction over federal areas within the state. The power and authority over the federal lands that are located inside the states. That's what that means. So when you're looking at exclusive legislative jurisdiction, it's talking about the power to make the laws on those lands. Okay, but then let's stop here and then let's write down right here that then the contracts creating the state of Texas to supply services by the states to the federal lands in the state. The contracts were then formed, and then we come up with concurrent legislative jurisdiction, partial legislative jurisdiction, proprietorial interest only, and then we also have an unknown, a fifth jurisdiction called unknown. Unknown may just be particular things in various contracts inside the states or with the states. Okay, so when we're talking about exclusive legislative jurisdiction, we're talking about the federal power to make the laws on the federal lands inside the states. And those people are citizens of the United States. They reside on the federal lands, and they're not allowed to use services of the state without going and getting a license. And that's their way of paying tax, because in the American jurisprudence 2D, it states that a license is a tax. And when the federal citizens of the United States receive the license and pay the tax, they then become a citizen of the United States. A citizen of the state where they're in. Okay, now when it's talking about a citizen of the state where they're in, they're not necessarily talking about like the whole state. Okay, they're talking about the contract state of whatever state you're in. They're talking about they're becoming a member of that contract and they're receiving services. So let's say, for example, you go to state of whatever state you're in and you get a driver's license. What do they require? They require you to admit to being a citizen of the United States. So when you do that, you're saying that you are a federal officer or employee on federal lands and you pay federal taxes, but not state taxes. And so you're paying for your license, and your license, as we know by AMJUR, is a tax. And you're getting it for the contract state of Texas, not Texas or whatever state you're in. Okay, and you're paying your tax. And when you pay your tax then to the state, then you can become a member of the state because you're now allowed to use those services. So in the 14th Amendment in 1868, I think it was, when they changed the requirements in the original Constitution from being a citizen of the United States just for legislators and the president. They're now including all the people inside the state in the 14th Amendment, subject to the jurisdiction, citizen of the United States, and subject to the jurisdiction. Subject to the jurisdiction means that you're under the exclusive legislative jurisdiction. You're under the exclusive legislative jurisdiction that we have here. And you are on a federal area inside the state, such as here. Okay, now, in order to leave the federal area and go to the school or the hospital or go from one federal area to another federal area, they had to create in the contracts another jurisdiction. Now remember, the contracts are state of whatever state you're in. And then they come up with concurrent legislative jurisdiction and partial legislative jurisdiction. Each state may call it something different. Texas may call it concurrent. Maine may call it partial. Okay, so then you have the titles for highways. Hospitals and asylums. Let's see, highways. Wherever it is. It's on here somewhere. Crime control and law enforcement. Okay, so my point is that all of the ones that I've highlighted in orange, this is the list of all the titles with the exception of Title 1, which would be right here, just got cut off. The ones in orange are not positively enacted. That means they're policies. That means these are part of the contracts. Okay, the contracts to allow for the citizens of the United States to come off the federal land and use the services inside the state. These are those contracts. These are those titles for those contracts. They're not in the Constitution. They're not a part of the Constitution because the Constitution didn't allow it, but allowed for contracts between the federal government and the states, or the federal government and individuals to supply services to the federal areas. Okay, and that's what these are. These are not for private citizens to have to comply with, including Title 26, etc., etc. So like education's right here. Okay. Commerce and trade, conservation. Okay, that's so education. So the people could take their kids off of the federal lands and use the services inside the state. So then they created the education contract title. Okay, they created the internal revenue contract title. They created hospitals and asylums, because one of the other issues was that if a military officer is living on a military post on the federal lands inside the state, and he's married and his wife lives with him and she needs to go to the hospital, and that military post has no hospital, she has to leave the federal lands and go into the state to use a state hospital. So this is the way they comply with that, with the state. Hospitals and asylums. Because, okay, here's highways. Highways is enacted into positive law because it is in the Constitution where it says post roads. But it's still a concurrent jurisdiction. Okay, which allowed for the Constitution and the state to have an agreement. According to the Constitution, it didn't have to be a part of the state of. Okay, so hospitals and asylums were contracted for use because that's not in the Constitution, and so it's only a policy. It's only part of the contract between the federal government and the states to supply services to the citizens of the United States who are on the federal lands. Okay, so that was part of the essential services: states, asylums, education, and agriculture, to be able to take food and sell it on the federal lands, and then commerce and trade, they could tax it. Not that you had to pay the tax, but that they could tax that when the people on the federal lands purchased those things. That's my understanding of it. Okay, public health and welfare, vaccinations, they're for citizens of the United States. Vaccinations, the masks are for citizens of the United States, because that's the only thing that the federal government can legislate for. And I told you that because Article 1 says the Congress has the power to exclusively legislate for the United States. The United States are all the federal lands. It says that here. Nationalatlas.gov by the U.S. Department of the Interior and U.S. Geological Survey has a list of the federal areas. This is my state, so you can go get one for your own state. The federal areas, which are just very small little areas. These are the federal areas in the state. Congress has the right to legislate exclusively apart from the state on its own, make laws for these federal areas. That's all they can do, just to make laws for this federal areas, and they can make laws for their people who come off the federal lands. Okay, they sending their kids to school, they're driving off the federal lands, they have to get a state of Texas driver's license, they have to pay the tax. We're not supposed to pay that tax. Private citizens are not supposed to pay that tax. Okay, let's see. Okay, I wrote a note here on the militia. Militia was comprised of the citizens of the state, which were called private citizens, called into service by the United States, or citizen or citizens of the United States, and while enlisted into service of the militia were called privates because they were in fact private citizens. Found in various Civil War enlistment records. Once a person has served as a private for a period of time, if he chooses to move up, he can apply for citizenship with the United States and become a citizen of the United States and start his time to qualify as a senator or representative or president. All federal public servants must pay a federal tax. Okay, and where do I have that at? I have that here too. The Public Tax Act of 1939. So in my other document, my other sheet, I showed you the various titles that are codes of the federal government that are not made positive. So what does that mean? It means that they're not actual laws passed by Congress. These are policies. These are contracts. Okay, these are contracts between the federal government and the state. Some call them charters, okay? And then the states can have charters with corporations to help administer the contracts, which are like your driver's license bureau. Your attorney general is part of the law enforcement, criminal and law crimes and criminal. No, I'm sorry, not that one. Crime control and law enforcement. Your attorney general is part of the policy to administer the contract. He's the chief law enforcement officer of the state, but not the whole state. Not the whole state, just the state created on paper to administer the contracts between the federal areas and the state. Okay? So remember, I showed you Washington left public service. He stopped being a citizen of the United States when he left public service, and he retired into the private life to become a private citizen as well, Donald Trump. And his lawyer said that when he left public service, he became a private citizen and was no longer subject to the impeachment that the Congress was trying to make. I mean, this either proves that Congress has no idea what it's doing right now, or they're willfully ignorant. Okay, so the Public Salary Tax Act of 1939 was passed into positive law. Okay, and then it has an enacting clause, okay, to requirements to be a law. It has to have a positive law citation, and it has to have an enacting clause. So then they put this inside Title 26. That did not make Title 26 positive law because Title 26 has no positive enacting clause. It has no positive law citation and has no enacting clause. The whole title has to be, for the whole title to be a law, it has to be enacted with an enacted clause, and it has to have a positive law citation. These not highlighted have positive law citations, okay? And they have enacting clauses. Title 26 does not, and it tells you that in their own code. If you go to OLRC or the Office of the Law Revision Council, just Google it, and you get to their website, click on the link that says positive law and read it, and then do some research on it. Judge Andrew Napolitano has talked about this. I think it was Thomas Aquinas, Aristotle. They've talked about this positive law thing, and that doesn't mean positive and negative. That means posit. It was posited as a law. Okay, so back to the Tax Act. This is the an act right here. An act relating to the taxation of the compensation of public officers and employees. This is the Public Salary Tax Act. Now remember, I told you, Washington was a public servant. He had a public salary. He paid a tax. He retired from public service, no longer received a public salary, was a private citizen, and no longer paid a tax. The same with Trump. Congress is going crazy because Trump doesn't pay taxes, or they claim he doesn't have to, because before he became a public servant, he was not a citizen of the United States. He actually never qualified to be president, but I won't stop that argument here, because you had to be so many years a citizen of the United States, remember? Like 14. Okay, so now a couple videos recently. This one was on Hunter Biden. This is from the Bongino report, I think is what he calls himself. It's on Rumble. I'm sorry, I don't have a better copy. Bongino report, published February 5th, 2021. It's called Press Secretary Confirms Hunter Biden Still Owns 10% Stake in Chinese Company. Okay, so I'd like to point out here that at 30 seconds in, this guy's asking at the beginning, it's only like a 43-second video. He says, you know, don't the Bidens still own shares in a Chinese company, which makes this issue a conflict of interest and come under really, you know, Title 26 and the other laws of the United States. And she says at 30 seconds in, I point to you that he is a private citizen. And by he, I believe she's talking about Hunter Biden. So you want to go back and look at this. Look at this video where she says, I point to you, he is a private citizen, because in the position that he's in government, he's not required to be a citizen of the United States, because there's only two people actually required, according to the Constitution, to be citizen of the United States. A Congress member who legislates, which is Aristotle's definition, a citizen of, in a geographical sense, means within, and then United States are the federal lands. Okay, I hope I'm being clear here. I hope that you're understanding this. I've explained it many, many times, and I think I'm getting a little bit better at it each time I explain it. So I hope that you can easily understand what I'm saying. Remember, I showed you this paper. This is part 1, chapter 1, outline of study. The employees on the federal lands wanted to send their kids off federal lands to the school, and they had to create a contract between the federal government and the state to pay for those services, because the court said no, because they weren't taxpayers, and that the only people required to pay tax are officers and employees of the federal government receiving compensation for services as civil servants. Public Salary Tax Act 1939 is right there, right on the cover. This is February 21, 1939. You can find this on the internet. It's difficult to find, but it's there. I have to search and search and search to get this. Okay, remember Trump retired from, or left his presidency. Even after he left, they were still trying to impeach him, but they couldn't, because he became a private citizen. Okay, the Constitution says there are two citizens of the United States, Congress members and the president. Washington retired from public service to become, I shall become a private citizen. Okay, so what are you? What are you? Are you on federal lands and you're a citizen of the United States? Or are you a private citizen? Okay, I'd like to point out one more thing here. It was another video that I just watched, just put out by Judicial Watch. It's on YouTube. It's called Conspiracy Confirmed, Organized Left, Big Tech, and Big Business Colluded. Uploaded on February 8, 2021. It was just this morning. It's a Lou Dobbs Fox News interview, which of course we know Lou Dobbs wasn't there. It was some other guy. It didn't even say his name. It's a 6-minute and 19-second video. At 5 minutes and 18 seconds, he talks about the New York Times admitting that it's wrong for the government to collect private locations on American citizens, which they also call American citizens. That's another way of saying private citizens. Okay, they use public as if they mean all of us. They use it in a way that makes us believe that they're talking about everyone, but we're not public because we're not federal officers or employees. We're not public. We're not public. We're not federal officers and employees. Okay, we are private citizens. And even our business is private. If you start a small business, it's private. It's outside the federal government's reach because the federal government has exclusive jurisdiction to make laws for where? The federal lands. Okay, and then it can contract with the state. So it can make commerce and trade contracts with the state. It can contract for customs and duties, education, food and drug with the state. With the state, but not the state's people, not the private citizens. And this is for the people on the federal lands. The contracts are for the people on the federal lands so they can pay taxes and use our services. Okay, and if you want to look at some of old Judge Andrew Napolitano's stuff, he kind of goes through some of this stuff. You have to like look through and pick and choose and figure out what it is you want to spend time on reading and what it is that can confirm here what I'm telling you. Also, you want to look in the Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, where it says the president is the executive officer of the United States of America. Okay, he's the executive officer of the United States of America, whereas in the second section, it says that the president is the commander-in-chief of the United States. Okay, the United States are the federal lands, the seat and the lands purchased. So in Texas, where I'm at, these are the federal lands. Now, all of these federal lands are not constitutionally allowed. National Park Service is not, Forest Service not, Fish and Wildlife not, Bureau of Reclamation not, only Department of Defense. And here they spell it with an S, but it's not spelled that way in the Constitution. Okay, you can go back through the various documents written by the federal government, and they always spell defense with an S, except for the very, very early ones where they spell it with the C, and in the Constitution it's a C. That's Old French, which is Norse for fortification, which is also mentioned in the Laws of Nations by Vattel. And I'd like to point out to you that also the founders spoke many languages, French being a common language that most of the founders spoke, as well as German, Greek, Italian, Latin, maybe some other languages that weren't mentioned in the stuff that I read. But they knew the difference between defense with a C and defense with an S. Defense with an S, the way they write it now, means vengeance, and that's from Latin. Okay, people have told me, well, they just spelled it wrong. No, they didn't. They were smarter than we are now, even with all the information that we have. They were very smart. They knew what they were doing. Okay, so I think I've hit basically everything. I just want to go over real quick the fact that the Declaration of Independence acknowledges that all men, all of mankind, every man individually, and we know it's individually because they say endowed by his creator with certain rights, unalienable or inalienable. Unalienable, I think Judge Andrew Napolitano says it should be unalienable, and it was written inalienable. They're given all their rights, okay? So all your natural rights are all of them, with the exception of hurting other people. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to cause injury to another. And I heard somebody recently say, or commit fraud. I agree with that too, okay? Because a man may not know that he's been injured because fraud was committed and he didn't realize that it was fraud. And so that's an injury. So whether he knows it or not, it's still an injury. But the thing I like to point out is, why would they give you all your rights in the Declaration of Independence and then turn around and take them all away and just tell you you only have 10 in the Constitution? That doesn't make sense to me. Why would they do that? They were smart. They knew things. They knew a lot of things. They spoke several languages. They wrote something as brilliant as the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution, yet they were unaware that they were giving you something and turning around telling you they're going to take all but 10 back, and that they had a right to do that, even though they admitted that only God could give you your rights. So if only God can give you your rights, how can man take them away and then give you just a few back? That would go against their own principles. So when they did that, what they meant was, when you agree to become a citizen of the United States and you take an oath, you're bound by the Constitution. Okay, so you give up all of your rights when you are bound by something. So when you take an oath, you're making a promise that you're going to follow the Constitution. But the states said, well, we want to guarantee some things, you know. We don't want to give up all the rights. We want some things. We want to make sure that we can have some rights. And so they slowly added 10 of them that they thought were very important, which were that on the federal lands, the representatives who were sent to Washington, D.C. should always be able to come back home and tell everyone what happened. So that's the transparency, your right to freedom of speech. They had a right to print those things that happened in Washington. Transparency, more transparency. Okay, they had a right to, because a lot of citizens of the United States, because they were on federal lands, some of them were military members. I would argue that representatives as well as senators had to be military members. Some people disagree. I would say that at that time, that was the only way to become a citizen of the United States and be on federal lands, was to be a member of the military. And so they had to wear a uniform, and part of their uniform was their weapons, their arms. Okay, and so they had a right to wear their arms into Washington. And they had a right to wear their arms because when you're in actual service, you're in uniform as far as the military goes. And so they had to maintain their right to wear their arms, which was why later they outlawed duels, because some of these people were getting pissed off at each other and dueling each other. And they thought that the smarter people thought that that was bad, and they wanted to outlaw it, and so they did. They outlawed duels. Of course, they outlawed them on federal lands because that's all the legislation the Congress has power to do, is make laws for the federal lands. That's called exclusive legislative jurisdiction that we went over. You remember that? Okay. So why would they give you all of your rights and take them away? They didn't. They acknowledged that private citizens, all the people at their birth, are under the laws of their own creator, and those laws include all of their rights with the exception of doing harm, and then I would add committing fraud. And then when you agree to become a member, which then makes you a citizen of the United States, of the federal government, you give up those rights, but you're guaranteed your 10, which is your Bill of Rights. It doesn't make sense any other way. It doesn't make logical sense any other way. Now I want to talk for a second about intuitive senses. Okay, so we intuitively think that we know things because that's what we were taught, and that's what we've known for so long. And so we think that when we say we have a Bill of Rights, we have constitutional rights, we have this, that, and the other, that we're saying something that is absolute truth. And in reality, it's not, because most of us don't have an oath, and we're not citizens of the United States, and we're not on federal lands, and we're not subject to the jurisdiction. So if we're not subject to the jurisdiction, we're not under those laws. If we're not under those laws, we have all of our rights, not just a Bill of Rights. So intuitively, people think, from their gut or from their heart, they think, well, I am a citizen of the United States. I have my Bill of Rights. Why would you just want a Bill of Rights? Why wouldn't you want all of them? I want all of them. I don't have an oath. I took an oath at one point in time. I was discharged honorably from the military, and so my oath has expired. I'm no longer a citizen of the United States, and I refuse to claim to be one. I'm a private citizen at this point, just like Trump, just like Washington when they left public service. So there you have it. I'm at 55 minutes. Sorry this took so long. It was a lot of information. I'm trying to get more clear and include more things that help people understand and get everything into their heads. So real quick before I leave you, okay, one thing I forgot. This is by Forgotten Books. It's the Legal Maxims. These are ancient laws that have stood the test of time, that over time, because they've stood the test of time, they become basically truths, absolute truths. And we talk about secession and leaving the union, and how do we do that? Okay, so for one, the corporation cannot leave the union. A corporation is the state of whatever state. For me, it's state of Texas. Cannot leave the union because it's a creation of the federal government. It's a contract. It's the contracts between the state and the federal government to supply services to the people on the federal lands, which are a tax. They pay a tax through their licenses and such. Okay, so this maxim says nothing is so natural as to dissolve anything in the way in which it was bound together. So Declaration of Independence, a new constitution, legislative processes. But for Texas, I believe it would have to be through a legislative body instituted by the people of the state, the private citizens, and under the Constitution of the Republic of Texas. Okay. There's a group called Republic of Texas. I'm not saying that they have to be the ones. I'm not saying that they are the governing body. Most private citizens didn't vote for them. So I'm not necessarily talking about them, and I'm not talking about them. So therefore, the obligation of words is taken away by words. The obligation of mere consent is dissolved by the contrary consent. Okay, so written words or spoken words, if it's put together that way, it's then dissolved that way. So if you have a birth certificate, I don't know, maybe write a new birth certificate claiming to be a private citizen. Okay, so now I just want to go over my sources real quick so that you can look at everything I'm telling you. Okay, so there's two places where I get most of my stuff. Okay, so that's archive.org, HathiTrust, which is HathiTrust.org. Google OLRC, and you'll get the website called the Office of the Law Revision Council, which you can find this list of titles as well as positive law, and it gives you a description of positive law and what a title is and what a title is not. Okay, nationalatlas.gov to see where the federal areas are in your state. And this is put out by the Department of Interior Geological Survey. I had someone tell me that my map was not by the Department of Interior. It says it right there on there. U.S. Department of Interior, U.S. Geological Survey. So I don't know what he was talking about. You can get the book where Washington talks about retiring from public service and becoming a private citizen on archive.org. I know it's there. It's probably also on HathiTrust. But this is the book. Screenshot it. Pause your video, whatever you got to do. His statement is on page 35. Okay, that's 35. It's right there, private citizen. Populist.press is where I found I think somebody sent this to me. Trump's lawyer saying that he's now a private citizen. I don't recall the website. You'll have to Google it, and you'll probably have to do a lot of looking to find it. Is for the 1939 Public Salary Tax Act. Okay. And let's see. This one, jurisdiction over federal areas in the state, which is part of this book, is on Archive and also on Hathi. Okay. The GSA contracts, which has the list of jurisdictions, is on Hathi. I have not seen it on Archive. It may be there. I don't always do extensive searches once I find something. Sometimes I just don't bother looking for the rest of it. On Rumble, on Bongino Report, February 5th, was this the Secretary of State answering a question from a reporter stating that Biden was a private citizen. Okay, then there was a Judicial Watch video where they're talking about the government, the New York Times admitting that the government has no right to collect private locations on citizens. He didn't use the term private citizen, but how can you have a private location if you're a public servant? You would be a private citizen. And that's on YouTube. Judicial Watch, it's his recent video. It was posted just this morning. And then I didn't go over this, but I just wanted to read something that it said because I really liked what it said. It says, Underground Thomas. Oh, okay. So this guy is an author, and he's a professor at a school in Austin, Texas, and he wrote, I don't know if you can see my books, he wrote Written on the Heart. His name is, I call him Beetlejuice, but it's not Beetlejuice, it's Bud Zyzuski. Okay, he wrote this book, and he wrote the book on Aquinas that I am reading, commentary on Thomas Aquinas's treatise on law. I'm reading this one right now. It's one of those things that I'm reading slowly. But he has a website called Underground Thomas, UNDERGROUNDTHOMIST.org. And he has a comment in here that I really like. It says, people whose expectations have been aroused and then crushed do not easily go back to sleep. So that's a good thing. I hope that in some kind of way, sadly, that you've been crushed so that you don't return back to sleep. Okay, and then this is just something on commercial matters being actions of debt and bonds, which I'm not going to talk about in this video, but I had it laying here, so I might as well tell you what it is. Okay, and then this book on maxims, you can get that on I think I bought this one off of Amazon, but you can go to ISBN Finder and you can either put the number in of the book and it'll give you a list of websites where they sell it, or you can just put in Peter, I don't know if that says Halkerston. Let's see if it's written any better inside. Stuck. Well, nope. Okay, it's got download on the Apple Store, Google Play, ForgottenBooks.com. I think they require like a $5 membership fee or something. Oh yeah, Peter Halkerston, LLD, from 1823. I love the old books. The old books are really good. I love these old books. They're so informative. And let's see. I have a ton of other books, but we're already after an hour. Oh, this one is also really good if you want to study jurisdiction. My daughter's laughing at me. She's like, "Oh, and already too much info." Okay, this one's really good. Federal Jurisdiction. This is by West. This is Concise Horn Books. And I believe that Horn Books are the books that Lincoln used. They've been around for a long, long time. And it does have a really good section on jurisdiction and the variety of laws, Erie Doctrine, Yeah, so I think I got this one at, oh, I don't know what that, I think I got this one actually on, the secondhand bookstore, Half Price Books, that's what it is. And they have a website. This is by Fander, James E. Fander, PH, Fander. Okay, and Forgotten Horn Books, you can find them online too, especially the really old ones. The really old ones are good to explain original laws. Okay, so I guess that's it for today, and I hope that you got something out of the video, and if you didn't, I'm sorry. I'm trying really hard to be as detailed and thorough as I possibly can be. It's really not that easy to understand. It's taken me a long time, and I've had a lot of help from a particular friend, and she sends me a lot of stuff to read, and I hope that I have saved you from having to read all the stuff that I've read, and that you can just watch the video and understand and return to being a private citizen and no longer claim to be a citizen of the United States, which is a federal officer or employee on federal lands, or a member of the legislative body, or president of the United States. Be kind to one another, do no harm, and commit no fraud. I like that one, it's a good one.